We don't hit home runs on this podcast. We work station to station. We're back after a bit of a mid-season break, somewhat unintended, but we're back to talk about the Blue Jays here at the All-Star game. Dustin, I want to do a vibes check in a moment, but first, we're going to be changing the podcast a little bit, just due to family commitments and things. Doing a weekly 1-hour podcast. If you could basically see the last couple of months of the podcast, it wasn't there. So really, unfortunately, both of us are not able to do that. At least one of us is not able to do that, that being me. So we're going to do some short podcasts. We're going to catch Dustin on his commute. We're going to do some coffee chats with Rob. And we're going to come up with a few things that'll just kind of make our Blue Jays chats a bit more easier. And we don't have to wait a whole week to chat about what we want to either. So Dustin, with that said, do you want to give me a all-star break vibes check?
I think the vibes are relatively good. I mean, on the whole, but a little bit of a kind of a sour taste given the last two series against the White Sox and the A's. But on the whole, I'm pretty happy to be in first place and to have the team kind of up and down the roster hitting well and being at least a complete team. There's a couple problem areas that I'd like to see improved, namely Vladdy, but otherwise, I think, vibes are high.
Yeah, and I guess you don't really know when a guy signs a huge contract like that, if that's how that's going to play. And I don't know, I think Vladdy he has these little, kind of bugs sometimes in his swing, at least we've seen the last few years, and it doesn't always seem to click, and he just starts rolling over balls and everything. But you kind of touched on like the big takeaway from, the, I guess, quote unquote, first half of the season is definitely the length of the lineup, because, every off season, we've essentially heard about Ross Atkins and Shapiro essentially pointing the fingers at the big guys, right? We count on these guys and, kind of tiptoeing around it, but essentially that the team's not performing because the big guys aren't performing. And I think Bo Bichette's been decent, right? Obviously not an all-star, but Vladdy, Dustin, you described it as one of like those Vladdy seasons, right? And it may be one of those. And I still don't change. I'm not going to change my opinion on whether they should have signed him or not. I still think they needed to sign him. It was just a club requirement to do that. And I think we can just hope for better. Like, Vladdy's still young. He could make a small change and the second half could be really good. Now, the length of the lineup, when you're leading off with Ernie Clement, Nathan Lucas, I think these are definitely good signs. And part of me kind of wonders in the Nathan Lucas situation, because I have been watching games when I can, and you will hear, oh, well, we know Nathan Lucas could hit. And my response to that is, well, why the fuck wasn't he up here earlier, right? Like, every year he's been that, 27th man, and finally he makes the team and he looks like a big leaguer.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, he is a big leaguer. It's just he's probably not, the kind of big leaguer that you would, want to pencil in every day, or if you do, it's because, you're just kind of filling out a roster. He's a contributor. He's a guy that deserves to be in the big leagues, for example. And a lot of these guys, at the bottom, I would include, David Schneider, maybe to a certain extent, Joey Lopifito and Ernie Clement even. These are guys they deserve to be in the big leagues. They're probably big leaguers, but on a serious team that's contending, you don't want to kind of have half your batting order be made up of those guys, ideally, right? You want a Vladdy performing at a high level. I was talking to my stepfather the other day, and he was just saying that Vladdy's been doing really good. He's probably top 30, top 40 in the league, but, the way that we expect him to be is, a top 3 or 4 in the league. And I think that's kind of where it's at. It's like he's a really good player on most teams, but we want him to be elite. And it's sort of glaring. Some of the games here against the A's, it was just glaring. Like, these are the kinds of games that you want your elite guy to put the team on his back, hit that sort of miracle home run or give them the lead.
We want Vladdy to do what we know he can do, right? Like those physical gifts, the bat speed and being able to just hit a ball like incredibly hard. The guys that we just talked about aren't really able to do that at the same ability, right? Now, one of the things that I think has fueled the Jays' success, and I do wonder a little bit, like, are the Jays that good, or the Yankees just hitting that are they hitting a skid? You know what I mean? Like, what do we think? Do we think it's a bit of both, or are the Jays as good as we think they are?
Something I always say is, like, no team is as good as they are when they're playing their best, and no team is as bad as they are when they're playing their worst. And so I think there's kind of a little bit of both. I think the Yankees are kind of playing, or at least when we were playing against them in that 4-game set, they were playing their worst, and the Jays were, to a certain extent, playing their best. And, I'm not counting out the Yankees. I mean, we see that Boston's
surging.
Seems like they can never lose. I think they've put together like a 10-game win streak. And, I know Tampa is probably falling off a little bit, but, the AL East is going to be a slog. And, I'm not taking for granted the first place at all. Those two teams, especially the Yankees and the Red Sox, are going to be nipping at the Jays' heels here coming out of the break, and they need to hit the ground running.
Yeah, and the Jays come back from the All-Star break on Friday against the Giants at home, so that should be interesting to kind of see how they get on. And I heard some discussion, like, do you think it's good to face like a good team coming out of the break, or maybe a weaker team so you can kind of get back going? To be honest, I think it's good they're facing the Giants. Seemingly a playoff team in the National League, and everybody seems to consider the National League better than the American League anyway. So I think, if we can get those wheels greased right away and hopefully have a good second half. The length of the order, and one of the key things that seems to be fueling the Jays' success, and to be honest, I agree with your you're not as good as when you're playing your best, and not as bad as your worst. I do think the Jays generally outplayed the Yankees in that 4-game series. I was able to attend the series sweep clinching game, which was nice, and I do think that the Jays seem to kind of weather that the Bronx Bombers storm. The Yankees did have that game where they hit a bunch of home runs, and they seem to be able to get through it and scratch by. With the length of the order, though, one of the key things that I think has kind of occurred, and it could be somewhat accidentally, is there isn't really any easy outs. And this is going to tie into my next point. I worry when Dalton Varsho comes back. As amazing as he is defensively, I don't know if this team can carry. I don't know how many 200 hitters this team can carry when most of the time this is an out waiting to happen, and I'm hoping that changes, of course, but because I do really like Dalton Varsho. But if you're asking me right now, do I want Dalton Varsho in center field or some kind of platoon of Nathan Lucas and whoever else you can put out there? I don't know. I'm starting to take a liking to Nathan Lucas a lot because of his ability to hit, right? And I know Dalton Varsho has power. I think the one thing that seems to have changed is there isn't guys with really low batting averages kind of humming around the bottom. And even, Jimenez, right? I've hated on him a little bit. He was injured, came back, was struggling, then started to get kind of hot a little bit. And then, of course, he's injured again, right? So, again, Ernie Clement at second base, who's hitting, I don't have his updated stats, but he seems to be around 300 versus, someone who's hitting in the low 200s and trying to get his average back to his career, his kind of career where where he kind of floats around most years. Like I wondered your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I'm not so sure that I agree that Dalton Varsho is an easy out. I know what you're saying. His batting average this year has not been great. I wonder if he's been struggling with something, health wise. I don't know. I know, like, he pulled the hamstring. That not necessarily a nagging type injury, but I kind of trust Dalton Varsho more than, let's say, Joey Loperfido right now to be a hard out. And again, the defense, as you suggested, is worth some of that downgrade, even if it is. I don't think Nathan Lucas is somebody that's going to be put out when Dalton Varsho comes in. I think.
I hope not.
No, I think that Loperfido's the odd one out there, maybe. Given one, his youth and probably the ability, for them to send him down fairly easily, that kind of thing. I'm hopeful that Dalton Varsho can kind of come in and figure it out. He seemed to have been, at least for the little bit that he was back there before the injury, to have been looking pretty good power wise. But you're right, the average needs to be brought back up to his kind of career 250-ish average.
And what do you think going into the trade deadline? Like, I think this seems to be probably one of the biggest trade deadlines since 2015?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you have so much kind of on the table that makes this a really impactful and interesting deadline for the Blue Jays, right? The fact that they're in first place, I mean, they may not be, but they've made it a race. They've made it, the division win a reality, at least something that they can strive for. You have Ross and Shapiro's contracts are up, I think one this year and one next year. What seems to be, I mean, just in talking or in listening to some of the people that would know, a better farm system, at least than the last few years with Namala and Yasavage, and there's a couple other guys there that are interesting guys. So they seem to have a little bit of a capital to work with. And then, they just have the money, sort of aspect of things where if some teams are just looking to dump salary, the Jays have been willing to take that on. So all of that kind of would tell me that they're going to be going all in, or at least they should be. And that's exciting. It's just whether or not Ross can do that. I mean, one thing you can say for him is that, his deadline deals have been worked out pretty good. I think Ben Nicholson Smith had an article that went through some of his trade deadlines of the past. And, reading that, it seemed pretty good. Like, he's been relatively successful in the guys he's traded away have not really turned out to anything. And the guys he got back, he got a lot of value in. So I'm hopeful for sure.
Would you trade Namala? Like if for the right, if a team wanted you to throw in Namala for another bat, an upgrade or another arm, would you be willing to move him?
I mean, I'm not a prospect hugger, as they say. Yes, I would trade him. I would trade anybody, as long as you're getting value back, as long as you're getting, the right deal back. It's all about the return. I mean, I wouldn't trade him for a rental, like 3 months of a guy. No, you'd have to be getting back somebody who's good, who's probably has some control beyond this year, and somebody who maybe, like a Barrios that you might be willing to convince to sign after that, whatever, duration is. So it has to be the right deal. He's probably as close to untouchable, him and Trey Savage are close to untouchable in the system as it gets. But, from my perspective, nobody's actually untouchable.
I feel like I would trade Namala before Trey Savage. and the Jays actually just drafted a high school shortstop in the first round. So if they trade Namala, they kind of have somewhat of his replacement already, because at least in terms of the profile. I feel like I would trade Namala before you save it, just because young arm, the possibility of that. Saying that, I'd be okay with, as I said, the right deal, if there's some term there. I think we could do it. Dustin, would you ever entertain a trade for Bo Bichette?
I mean, no, I don't think I would trade away Bo Bichette.
So there would be nothing. And this actually comes as a question from Adam. And Adam, basically, I was sitting around a table, and he thought his position was Bo Bichette's gonna leave anyway. How about you trade him for a pitcher? So we talked about what do the Jays need? I do think they need an arm. Would you trade him for like a pitcher with term, like a Barrios situation, essentially?
I mean, maybe, but again, I don't know if that deal is out there. I mean, I think you're getting a rental Bo Bichette. Any team that would want Bo Bichette is likely going to want him because of a playoff push or a run for themselves. So then why would they give away an arm if that's the case? And so, like, you're really, the only deal that's out there for Bo Bichette is prospects, which is not what we want right now. So, I mean, I get the kind of idea or the thinking of Bo is, not going to be around next year, or he's likely not going to be signing with the Jays. I don't know if I agree with that, but I get that thought, and I get, wanting to try and get some value for it. But in my mind, the value for Bo Bichette on the trade market was last year, and he was injured, and unfortunately, probably there wasn't, any takers or anybody willing to kind of part with prospects for that. But no, I wouldn't trade him. I think one interesting thing, just kind of touching on Namala and Bo, is that kind of shortstop position. There may be some, tea leaves we can read into whether or not they're willing to give up Namala, in terms of whether or not they're going to make a run at signing Bo, right? Like, for example, if we hear that Team X wanted Namala really badly, but, Ross wouldn't give him up, well, then maybe that tells us that, they're holding on to him because they're not confident that Bo is going to sign. But if they kind of trade Namala, then maybe that's a indication that they're going to go after Bo. So I think there's some interesting thoughts that could come out of, or interesting information rather, that could come out of that situation.
Yeah, I think a Bo Bichette trade is like, you're really threading the needle here. Like, we're talking about a front office, teams performing well, but it's still not I don't think it's a popular front office, and trading, one of your quote unquote two best players, it has to be a certain deal. And I just think threading that needle is just I don't know if it's possible. And I think, you actually brought up a good point that a team looking to bring on Bo Bichette is likely competing too. So are you also then strengthening possibly another team out there that, you might face at some time in the playoffs, or even if things go right, a World Series, right? Imagine you trade him to, I don't know, let's just say the Dodgers, and then you make it to the World Series and Bo Bichette trots out in Dodger blue. Like, man, that's I think that would be a weird situation, and I just don't know if it's there, and I don't know if that's the kind of profile of trade that Ross Atkins seems to be quite good at. Because if there's one thing, you said last year, we got to give Ross his flowers, right? Because they'd had a good trade deadline last year, and generally he seems to be quite good at this particular aspect. And yeah, I don't know, I don't know if there's a lineup of suitors, and I just don't know, like, how do you sell that to the fan base, like an unpopular front office trading one of its best players? And I can tell you, at the Yankees game that Kreger and I were at, when he came on as a pinch hitter, like the dome like lit up, right? Like I don't know if he's as popular as say Vladdy, but he's quite popular with Jays fans, and I think I don't know if that would go over well, and especially if you trade Bo Bichette, let's say you get that pitcher with term, right? That Barrios kind of profile, right? That's great, but if things don't kind of go as planned or as hoped the rest of the season, oh man, the knives are going to be out, and in some way, in some ways, probably rightfully so.
Yeah, rightfully so, for sure. I mean, to me, there's just a lot more value in keeping Bo the 2 or 3 months here down the stretch for a possible division run, especially. Bo is more valuable, I think, than any. I think you can get the kind of pitcher that you need to help you without trading Bo. So why would you trade Bo, right? And then, the value of just having him play with this team down a stretch run, hopefully if they do have some success, at least win a series or two in the playoffs, that's good taste in his mouth. He can kind of experience what it's like to actually, win with this team and with Vlad and all that. And then you have his ear for the trade or the contract negotiations. I do think they're going to try to make an offer, and they're not going to just let him go for nothing, or at least, well, they're not. They're getting nothing either way, but they're going to try and sign him. And I think trading him away just ruins that possibility. And like you said, you trade him away to a team, and then he's hitting bombs against you. That's no good. So, I just think that's a no-go. If the team was doing poorly, then for sure trade him, try and get some value, but not right now.
All right, Dustin. Any other comments, thoughts, like All-Star break that's been banging around between your ears that you wanted to get out there?
You know what? Not really. I just, I'm hoping that. Well, actually, I will say this. Earlier, I wanted to touch on your comment about coming out of the All-Star break and whether or not facing some tough competition is a good idea. I think that I agree that facing some difficult teams, and then I think we have the Yankees again after San Francisco. So I think that's good. I think it'll kick the butt of the boys, and I'm just excited. I'm probably more pumped about this team than I've ever been since we started doing this podcast, and definitely since 2015, 2016. So let's go for the division.
You mean you're more excited than when we assembled the Dalton Varsho, Kevin Kiermaier, and George Springer outfield? Because we were pretty excited at that point. I guess the podcast is very new, and we thought everything was great, so it didn't work out so well. But actually, I want to kind of touch on that before we kind of slide out here. I think there are a lot of hardcore Jays fans who are excited right now. Living in the city of Toronto, the buzz is not there yet. And I thought I going into the Yankee series, like the day before, the day of, all the Sportsnet, this is the biggest series, this is like, and a week before I was saying to you guys about that series, and that's why I wanted to go, because I thought it was a really important series. I don't know if I've actually seen Aaron Judge anyway live, so that was part of that as well. I don't think the buzz, because it's kind of early-ish still. I don't know if the buzz is in the city yet. Like if you talk with Rob and Craig, or all these guys, like anyone who's really into it, I think is quite excited. But I think there's a cautious optimism here, and I think it's partly because we've been burnt before, and now if this is 2 months from now, if we're talking on September 15th, not July 15th, I think and we're in first place, I think there's going to be considerable more excitement. But as the summer rolls on, I do expect it to pick up, but I don't. It's not palpable right now. Like I do remember 2015. I was I moved to the city the year prior, so I was living in the city, and like it was like that run at the end of after they made those trades and they just started dominating. Like it was very palpable. Like everybody got on board. And you know, I'm not going to name names or call out people, but there's definitely people who hadn't been to any Jays games that year that were buying as many tickets as they could get their hands on. And I don't know if that quite is happening yet, but I am looking forward to that, like turning that corner essentially, right? Because I think I said before that like the Blue Jays are the champions of this city's heart when they're winning, right? You know, we have an abusive relationship with the Leafs, right? The Raptors, I do think get going, but I think it's a little bit different. And I also think it's a little bit different because the Scotiabank Arena actually holds significantly less people, and so I think there's a certain buzz when the Jays, and like the Jays are the champion of the city's heart. And just going out here, Jim Clancy, OG Blue Jay, passes away this week, and I'm hoping I don't know if they're going to show it on the TV, but I'm hoping they do like a little thing on Friday when they come back. He had spent a considerable amount of time with the Blue Jays, and Quentin was actually in my ear this morning saying that he won. There was a trivia question on the Fan. This is a while back, and it was who has the most losses as a pitcher in Blue Jays history, and he knew right away it was Jim Clancy. And it's not because he was a bad pitcher; it was just because he had basically been on, you know, an expansion team, 77 obviously, and through some really probably dark years with the Blue Jays. So he racked up the losses, and Quentin was in my ear about that this morning. So rest in peace, Jim Clancy.
Yeah, rest in peace, Jim Clancy. Definitely a mainstay. You know, somebody that, you know, the fans now probably aren't too familiar with, but definitely somebody that old heads would really appreciate. And, you know, sad to see him go. I think, you know, your point about the city and the buzz, I'll, you know, defer to you as somebody who's actually there. I know that some commentary was that it was kind of growing, it was building during this win streak, and maybe there's been a little bit of a damper on it recently with, you know, the series against White Sox, the A's, and then, you know, the All-Star break, and it's kind of died down. But, you know, I would guess that a strong trade deadline and a really intense push through August will bring the city to life from that perspective. So here's hoping.
Definitely. Well, Dustin, I think that's all the time we have. Thank you very much for joining me. Okay. Yeah, it sounds great, actually. All right, I'll talk to you later, dude. Have a good night. Okay, bye.